Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome into the Morning Five on Monday, October 27, 2014. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm joined by the People's Champ, Matt Baxendale. Bax, Ohio State beat Penn State 31-24 in double overtime on Saturday in State College. We like that score. 31-24 in double overtime reminds me of a certain national championship game, but this particular game wasn't as sweet. Even though it was a win, the Buckeyes were heavy favorites in this one. It was the definition of an ugly win. They dropped from 12th to 13th in the coaches' poll, remained at 13th in the AP poll. Back, style points matter in college football, and the Buckeyes certainly didn't pick up any on Saturday night. In fact, this win could end up hurting their resume at the end, not as much as a loss would have, of course, but if there's a glut of one-loss teams, and Ohio State is sitting there with a 14-point loss to a bad Virginia Tech team, and now a narrow win over a bad Penn State team, the Buckeyes could find themselves on the outside looking in at the playoff, even if they're able to go 12-1 and win the Big Ten. A lot of people say back a win is a win. That's not true in college football. Style points matter. Your thoughts a couple days after this Penn State game?
First of all, I agree with you. In college football, a win is not always a obvious win. This isn't the NFL where, for example, Pittsburgh beat Indianapolis 51-34 yesterday. If the Buckeyes had won a game 51-34, we'd all have been panicking like last year. Whereas in the NFL, that's a blowout, excessive, incredible win, It's a completely different paradigm. I will say this, though. If Ohio State goes into East Lansing and wins in 2 weeks, people aren't going to remember this Penn State game as much. They're just going to remember the fact that OSU knocked out Sparty on the road. And it's frustrating as this game was. I said it both in the Bucky yesterday and on the Bucknuts 90 that I have never been more confused by an offensive game plan in my life. The truth of the matter is there is a very big bright spot, which is that Ohio State went on the road in front of the most hostile environment they're going to face this year. So the bright spot is that this is hopefully a learning lesson for all of those kids who are, 13 out of 24 underclassmen who are currently starting. Let the lesson have been learned, and when they go into East Lansing in 2 weeks, maybe they'll know how to handle the environment and the crowd a little bit better than they appeared to on Saturday night. I think it's just still too early to really say that this is going to be the kind of thing where the optics are going to kill them, especially coming off of 4 straight big wins. Ohio State made their own bed in this one. This game shouldn't have been this close. But if they keep winning and they knock off Michigan State, I don't know if this is going to be held against them as much as it would have been in the past when there were only 2 teams that had a chance to play for a title.
I'm glad you touched on the environment at Beaver Stadium. Hats off to Penn State. That's the way it should be done. My question to you is, what can be done about the environment at Ohio Stadium? Now, we've all been in the horseshoe when it's rocking. I think back, my example that I go to, my default example is 1995 Notre Dame. I couldn't hear myself think. It was just raucous the whole game. And there's been some Michigan games that are like that. 2002 Michigan game comes to mind. But it's just not consistently like that. I know Penn State's not consistently like that. If they're playing Akron, it's not like that. I'm not talking about that. But let's say next year when Penn State comes to the horseshoe, it's not going to be like that. And I know Ohio State doesn't look at Penn State as their number one rival, but it's still a big rivalry game. And I just think the horseshoe has more to offer. It can get louder. Again, not for MAC games, but against Big Ten teams that come in, not just Michigan, but other big games. When Michigan State comes next year, games like that, what can be done, Bax, to enhance the atmosphere at the horseshoe?
Well, there's a few things that can be done, and I've long advocated having every game but the final game of the year against that school up north be night games. I think fans are way more into it under the lights, regardless of opposition. They're into it for the defense, noise-wise, from the first play of the game. We talked about a couple years ago. Remember when Cal came to the shoe and gave Ohio State a really tough game? Well, all these noon games, people sit on their hands and they're like, come on, why aren't we doing a better job? They don't really make the noise unless it's like the Michigan game, I think if you have night games where people have all day to get themselves, quote-unquote, prepared for it, you're going to have a much stronger atmosphere. That's already a bigger thing. And I'll tell you this, too. Penn State, for the Ohio State crowd to really get to the level that Penn State was at for us this past weekend, Buckeye fans have to look at Penn State like a major rival. And while it is a rivalry, Penn State fans see us as the rivalry. We don't look at it that way. I'll tell you right now, I was in the horseshoe for the USC game in 2009, the Texas game in 2005. Those nights, the stadium was unbelievable. I couldn't hear myself think. My ears were ringing for a day. Those are the type of crowd atmospheres that Ohio State is capable of doing it. I think just after a decade of almost uninterrupted success, the fans have to really have themselves in a position to, quote-unquote, get up for it the way Penn State fans do. Because let's face it, they've been mediocre for the most part for the last couple of years. And they had a little interlude in the 2000s where they were pretty good, but before that, they had another 5 years before that where they were terrible. So when we think of the whiteout, we go back to 2005 and remember that 17-10 loss that we took where Troy Smith sort of had his last bad game as a Buckeye until his last game as a Buckeye. And people forget that Penn State for 3 years prior to that was completely, abjectly horrible. And that was sort of their return to not being awful. And since then, Ohio State is 3-0 against that whiteout. So, perception matters, I guess. But I think Ohio Stadium is certainly capable of being as loud as that is. We need more night games, plain and simple.
Well, we're getting one this Saturday somehow. I don't know how this is a night game, but the Buckeyes will host Illinois this Saturday at 8 p.m. I just looked up the point spread this morning, Bax. The Buckeyes are favored by, drum roll please, 28.5 points. This is one of those games you want it to be over with at halftime so you can rest your starters up for Michigan State the following week. Of course, the Spartans will have a bye week. My goodness, not only they get the Buckeyes at home at night coming off a bye. It's really set up for the Spartans. Ohio State's going to go in there and win, but we'll see what happens. Bax, Illinois is coming off a surprising win over Minnesota, but this one should not be close. I think if I'm, right now, if I had to pick the spread, I would take the Buckeyes to cover. I know that's an enormous point spread to cover, but Illinois is not good. I know they just beat Minnesota, as I said, but I think the Buckeyes can win this one by 5 touchdowns.
Yeah, and Illinois beating Minnesota at home is one of the weird, quirky traditions of the Big Ten. I think this is 3 or 4 times in a row it's happened where Minnesota's gone to play in Champaign and been defeated. Almost all the times they've gone there, they were favored to win too, and they got upset. So for whatever reason, Illinois really gets up for that Minnesota game. But that also really boned Ohio State when it came to perception because Minnesota had a real opportunity to be sitting there at 8-1 the week after we played Sparty, and then they decided to blow it against a bad Illinois team whose coach might have been fired this week if they hadn't won that game. So in the end, this is not a good Illinois team. In fact, they're the worst Big Ten team we're going to play this year. I don't think that's a surprising or major statement to anybody even. I mean, now that Purdue's rotated off the annual schedule, now that Indiana's at least capable of occasionally scoring points, I would legitimately say Illinois is the worst team that we're going to play in the Big Ten this year. And that game being under the lights can't even explain it. But you know what? The crowd will be way up for that game the first 2 quarters while it's in doubt. And they're going to have that home field advantage that I was talking about that they probably wouldn't have had if this was a noon game where the crowd would have been like, come on, it's Illinois. Why are we not winning 28-0? Well, we haven't kicked yet. I don't care. We're supposed to be up 28-0. The attitude's going to be completely different from the crowd. That will be a benefit. But in the end, this is a team Ohio State should drill, and I agree with you. They should go out and hopefully the coaches let J.T. Barrett throw the ball in the first half, and we go back to being the unstoppable offense that we were the previous 4 weeks. Illinois certainly is the type of defense for Ohio State to put up 50 points again and get healthy on offense after a tough week at Penn State.
On the site later today, we're going to have our usual Monday team coverage when we interview head coach Urban Meyer and 2 assistant coaches. We're getting Stan Drayton and Kerry Combs today, and we're going to interview a few players, so look for coverage on that this afternoon. Also this afternoon, we're very excited to tell you about a one-on-one interview we recorded with Stacey Elliott that we're going to post. It takes you behind the curtain of what families deal with during the recruiting process, especially when they are torn in separate directions. The Justin Hilliard situation reminds me a lot of the Ezekiel Elliott situation 2 years ago, so we're going to bring on Mr. Elliott to take you behind the curtain of recruiting. So look for that this afternoon on the site. Thank you very much to the People's Champ, Matt Baxendale. Thank you very much to all the listeners out there. Take it away, best damn band in the land.